Porch par coffee pina ab community disruption samja ya raha hai yi unhon kaha jabek rhinestone tank top par 3-inch heels mine lipti huor admir gravel driveway para ae, clipboard leak jazwa koi court kasumin ho, unkakana thek maradak unk waterfront knezari ise match na karta, main shore sharaban na ikia, baz muskura karup dadaji ki land deed nikali. Jo unkpura hoaxapnoko legal paper par bakshk drawing zabana dedi thi, agar apnkabi overconfident ho president ko apni zamin pargase diko hai, ta samaj saktain main kai adal raha the agar apk podasi kebi property manager ko dictator samaj lage, ta yekohani ap klai hai, Maranam Lucas Thompson hai. Main 35 Salkar retired hydrologist Hunjo Pale Department of Natural Resources Klikam Karda Ye Lakeside Cabin Muj Dadaji Same Meal High, Jo 1960s Mine Vietnam Say Wapas Ank Bad Ye Mean Carried Carbon Ayatha Cabin Up Nap Mine Kaz Nai, Ekotosa Do Bedroom Gar High, Weathered Cedar Siding Ksay Thaw Parane Metal Roof Ksaith. Lekan Zamin Lakeside Hijahan Dadaji Ni 1967 Minequan Dak Benayatha Manyan Shanti Sakun Dunayatha Sochitha Freelancing Karunga Panik Ganarzine Dagi Kamazalunga Lekan Shanti Dorki Ba'athi Subadarways Parjokadatha Wa Brenda Rutherford Ek 30 Sal Kiladki Joap Napko 21 Sal Kod Kain Ki Kashish Kar Raithi Pink Rhinestone Wallet Tank Top Plastic Jay-Z leggings, lal high heels paying the Joe gravel parchlan kli bilkul na ibane the, saith du log the, admi Joe apni gadi par nazar del rahathe, ek orad josha iad apni zayin dagik valent se per shan lag raithi, Brenda ni apni ba'at shuruki, Joe muj zayada friendly nai. Balki ek military inspection Jay-Z logi, muj pine registates mine welcome kia nap ko hoki president pataya, for dramatic and des mine mir cabin ki tera fishar card hubitayak mujturant apni property ko unk standards commutibuk lana hoga, mir paint carring approved na etha, landscaping coffee karab thi, ko architectural committee approval keys rad thi, main upn parane flannel shirt jeans mine. Jism boat engine oil ki kushbuthi, kaditha sakrahathak iamain kisi dunia mine agayahunjahan logic ki koi value nai, wa bar humari community humor standards karaithi jazuzn ilaka karida ho, jab main puchikierules kabsehain. Daski muskan zayada fake ho gayi, kahakye standards tab sehain jabia community banithi har resident ko unkapalan karnazaruri high taki property ki mat bani rehi, mujek moto folder dia jism legal documents, color charts, architectural guidelines thijo ek city planning department ko biharan kardeti, kahaki 30 din kander sabkuch thik karna hoga. Warna finds Luganj, Jabuzn finds Bola, Taisa Laga Jays Damki the Raiho, Sabsiji Ba'at Yethik Mir Dadaji Nikhebi Hokazikrabina Ikiatha Unhon Hamshalbataya Lakeside Zindagi Kiazadi Sabs Body Cheese High, Brendik Jankbad Main Dadajik Papers Dik, Parkoi Hoya Deed Restrictions Naimili, Surfpura Ain Tax Records, Asli Deed 1965 Ka, Maintenance Bill Mile. Lekanek Barana Wooden Box Mila, Jism ek envelope Thed Jism Lakoth important property documents Tadaji Kathon Se, Wa envelope sealed Tha Bari Mesuz Ho Raha The, Jesus main boat Kuch Hupe Ho, Brenda Ki Pali Milikat Ni Muj Pershan Kar Diathe, Manyan Shanti Duna Ayathe, Par Milgayathek Bureaucratic Janjat Jism Brenda Hai Sabstage The, Uski Bodin Muj Har Wakyad Adi The. Kaskar Jabwa Kadi Thik Maradaka unauthorized High Dadaji ki property ab unk standards Pkari Nai Tardi Sab Kuchaji Blag Rahatha Muj Longak Wa envelope Muj Kuch Jawab Dasakta High, Main Wa envelope Kola Jo Mila Uznporikal Badali, Ek Haftbad Muj mailbox Mine Ek official violation notice Mila. Jo fancy letterhead park hoputha kasi bade legal office kakam lag rahatha notice 19 bade infractions lik thean unauthorized doc, paint color non-compliant, Landscaping violations at fine $500 15 din kander jama karna thorna penalty badhagai. Iskushga war document Ksaythek letter Thajo Cornelius Blackwood Nam Kwakil Kotha Jo Pina Registates Kokteraf Saytha is letter mine mujdam gidi gay the kager main foreign community tamam standards regulations kapelan nai karda Dakanuni kar waiki jigi main Brenda Rutherford ka number diokia taken allegations par xngita ba adchid hosake magar jabuzn phonuth ai Uskitonit ni nichid kain wali thi klag rahatha waphe say practice kardi holagon ko nichid kain ki. Hello Lucas, kaha, ekes lage mine jaskisi slobake say baat kar raiho, main sakrai thi tum kob kal karoj, sha'ayad tum hok by laws padlini sha'ai thi pale, sweetie. Yes standards kisi wajase hain sab ko inkapalan karnazaruri high, kisi ko exception naida sact. Shayunka kondinya and kin best say kun naho, jabuzn humari community ptnazardia, tama jazes hoik wamajek ger munasib mem samajdi hai, nak ek hakder rihushi, jab main samja ain ki kashish kar rahathak mir dadaji kebi ho kruls gzernaya a, dauzn ribaat bikar card hu ekthuk wali hansidi, wakt badal gaya, honey. Yab Wild West Nai Raha is call say per shan hokar main as hokpa air mine research karnish urikia jo akungok say sama ayath main brendikdai hu documents kogant bar pat hu online records ksaith milate hu kashish ki ek timeline banane ki jo muj milawa kam as kamharat anjays th papers commutabook Pine Registates Ho 2018 mine officially registered Huath Surf Panch Sol Pale, Sal High Community Guidelines, Architectural Standards, Landscaping Rules, Waterfront Usage Protocols Adopt Kaige, Sabsiji Ba'at Yethik Mir Dadaji Niapni Zamin 1965 Mine Karidi Thi, Jokai SS Hokon Say 53 Sal Peki Ba'at Thi. Timeline Bill Kolbinat Naithi, Mre Confusion Tab Bad Gay Jab Main Ho Documents Mind I Property Boundaries Koap Ni Yedin Say Compare Kia, Jo Mir Dadaji Ni Muj Bakpan Mind Kaithi, Hokam Apun I Lake and Ko Bishamil Karda Thajo Mir Kondank Original Lot Kahisahain, Jiz Minwa Waterfront Access Bithajahan Miradak High. Main backpan minyahan garmai on mine dadaji ksaith chalakarda jadwamuj zamin kiha dane landmarks dkata batata thak hamari zamin kahan katam hodi hai agli property kahan shuru hodi hai lekan jo haki kat hok kagazat mine thi wamri yedin sabil kol milti naithi sha'aya dilag main inheritance kpayahan salon tak na iraha Eksham jab main dok par batha huatha sab kuch samajn ki kashish kar rahatha tabek buzergorat mri podazin ki taraf saya ae, uskinam Dorothy Weatherby 67 Sol ki retired librarian, Jo Pichel 20 Sol sayuhan raithi, Dorothy Minek Isi shanti persecunata thi Jo apkotarant rehat dedi thi, uska and as Isa thajes zine dagi ki mushkul dik chuki ho. I li ikasi say derginai, uzn muskurit hu kaha, maindik hai is half tumharad gerd coffee hungama ho raha hai, Brenda Rutherford tumhari property kol lekker coffee shore machirai hai, jab main apni confusion violation notices kpa mine bataya, da Dorothy kachera sanjita hogaya, tumhar dadaji kizaminia han bahad pay say hi. Jabia Garban Rehi that Abahad Adiyat Sayunk Properties Kakil Rakhigayatha Yepwa Mamlathik Na Elagta, Dorothy Ni Muj Mashwar Diak Main County Records Check Karun Take Apni Zamin Key Boundaries, Easements, Yakoi Be Restriction Jo Time Ksathlai Gay Ho, Unkapatichil Sake, County Courthouse Mine to Men Property Transfers, Deed Restrictions, Kanuni Agreements Tafsil at Hodihain. Agar is Hoke Beach Kuch Kanuni Hockey Kat Height Awawahan Milj Iggy, Agar Na Ihai, Da Yebikuch Kejita Hai, Nyebibitayukwa Neighborhood Mine Ho Rehi Kuchaji Bogarib Kaman Parnazar Rakti Hai, Unho Wolon Kolagta Haikunk Pizayada Iktia Hai, Jab Kaki Kadmai Naisa Na Ihai, Maindik Haik Wakagar Walon Ko Der Dimate Hain, Saluk Guzarnk Bojud. Zyadatar law gladnik bajaman jatain, jitna zyada main suktagaya, utni zyada maritasdik huik kuchgad bodho ra'i hai, brendik jaz body tariq, ambiguous timeline. Yeba Kmir Dadaji Nikhebi Bi Property Parkoipe Bandi Naibatei, Yesab Milkara Kaisi Sarati Hauki Terafishara Kartajo Jari Takakat Klana Ayakthi, Main Phase Lakiak County Recorder Kadaftra Janazarori High, Agar Yeho Wakimari Property Parhak Rakta High, Da Uskakoi Official Spoot Hoga, Agar Nai. Thomas Brenda Kosa Modulina Shaik Ekes Shaks Satak Rav Carnajo Environmental Canoe Na Milky Yet Kukuk Kosa Majda Hai, Bahad Burigalit Fmi Hogai, Main Plan Banayak Monday Subasab Say Pay County Office June, Dorothy Nikuchaisi Ba'at Kaithi Jo Mirzan Mine Regaithi, Tumher Dadaji Akasha Yaradmi the. Jo Harchis Kakatir Kudrak the Wakabi Tumaisi situation mine na ikad Jehan Tumapni Hafezat Klai Zarori tools na rakt ho, Muj Mesus Huawathi Karai Hai, Main Jald Hisamaj Pongak Miradada Kidna Durandesh Monday Ki Suba Muj Millbrook County Recorder Office Ligai. Ekaisanaya aladarjika imerajahan sahur ki taza coffee copy paper ki kushbu raithi, Jo clerk Marie Madad kar raithi, uskanam evlan thay ekaisi oranjo sak mine logon ki madad mine dilshaspi rakti bureaucracy mushkul res imagine mine meher thi, jab main usapni talab batei. Tuaski ankon mine wajashchamak utha jobataya thakusko as case cam miltain. Property boundary disputes. Ye cases hamsha dilshas podhain. Wabali muj computer terminal tak ligai. Chalo. Tumhari property ktamam records nika tain dictain kia documents kayakahani sunatain. Igli 30-minute mine jo uzantaloshkia. Uzmri sak kopori tera badal dia, official property deed need kayak mir dadaji surf cabin usk gerd kodi zamin kmalik naith, baki itni bari zamin kmalik thajo main kabi sochi bin aithi, county survey maps commutabook, hamari property surf cabin tag medu naithi. Baki unjaga unko bishamil karti thijais honi apni community area kahatha, jo doc brendan ni bin ijazat wala butayath, wa 1967 mintomum legal environmental structural permits ksaith banayagayath, sabsaman ba'at yethik kisi bitera kaland transfer, easement, yakoya isa agreement jise hoko hamari property paryak tiyar milta ho. Uskakoi record naith, documents ni bearbard kayak Thompson Condon Kimilakana Zamin 1965 say ajtak lagatar high, Evelyn Nitamam Zarori papers, J's Asli deed, survey maps, permit records key copies print key, jab main unkagazan kogur rahatha, wadhimia wa is mine wali. Isi Sarati Halam Bihodi Hijitni Apsak Saktain, Kabine Development Sprini Properties Kagurd Ban Jatain. Log boundary hakuk kumulak galat and as a log alatain, so ye hike kai aho walesak mine situation ko samaj na ipe, yan buj kapko dokadin ki kashish kar rehi hain, uski ba'at dorothy ki ba'at ksaith match kardi thi, lekan jab yesab official documents mine ign komila, dahaki kadzayada ways ho gei, na surf ho kahamari property parkoi hak na ithe. Bakiwa purgalat famik saith chulrehi the property boundaries kazi hain, wapas cabin jaba iya, tapatachalik brendan ni miracle afetnimu imtezkar dia high, mirgark darwaze pardus re-violation notice lagi thi, is bar fine $1,000 tak bar gaya main pay violation kajawab nai diatha community rules kikol afwarzi jori raki, uznmri phone par bikai aggressive messages code Harek pay sayzayada tank karnwala. Akri message mine bataya gayathakazn Friday din emergency ho board meeting bulay hijahan mre property kmaseo ko discuss kia jiga. Lekan Dorothy ni mujsus shamba kia batayuk brenda podasai kagargar yakar miracle afafwahin failuraithi. Jo mujrahua wakasi buri reality TV show jzatha main phase lakia ksida brenda kagar yakara say samjada karun upnhaith mine county records kikaruska samakarun, uskagar woithajo ap expect card hain. Manzilimic Mansion, teen-car garage, perfectly maintained lawn, Aurat Nisari Sijawat Ekpwara Home Improvement Store Barje, Jabuzn Darwaza Kola, Dawa Unicorn Theme Wally Sequined T-shirt Ripped Denim Shorts Beneath the, Jo Clearly Unlogon Key Style The Jo Kabi Manat Ki Hakakat Na Injant, Uzn Muskurit Hukaha, Agar Ye Hamra Neighborhood Kasher Rati Wapaze Agaya Hai. Fine ki mafi mangn, main apnea was persekuna professional raki batayak main property boundaries hoki authority par research ki high, Lekan County documents dkain se pay high uzn rhinestone se sije hui nailski ek dismissive hath hilakarmri ba'at bikrakardi. Brenda didn't care what old papers said. This is my neighborhood now, she snapped. These standards exist for a reason. And I don't care if your family has been squatting here since the Stone Age. At that moment, Cornelius Blackwood appeared from inside the house, carrying a briefcase and wearing a cheap suit that treated and failed it to look expensive. He threatened me with immediate legal action if I didn't comply with all HOA demands within 48 hours. When I mentioned the property ownership information I had uncovered, I caught a flicker of panic in Brenda's eyes, though she quickly masked it with renewed aggression. You think you can intimidate me? I've dealt with losers like you before. Over the next few days, conversations with neighbors revealed a community torn and confused about the real authority of their HOA. Chester Davidson, a 39-year-old contractor living 2 houses down, approached me privately after Brenda's rounds of rumor spreading. Look, I don't know what's really going on, he said. But that woman has made life miserable for everyone for years. If you've found proof that she doesn't have the authority she claims, a lot of us want to hear about it. Several neighbors shared similar frustrations with Brenda's heavy-handed tactics and arbitrary rule enforcement. Yet, some residents seemed genuinely worried that property values would plummet if HOA standards weren't strictly enforced. Dorothy remained a steady source of support and practical advice. She shared more about Brenda's history in the neighborhood, including how she had driven at least 2 families to sell their homes and move away rather than endure her harassment. That woman has serious control issues, Dorothy said. She moved here 3 years ago after a messy divorce and immediately started trying to turn this place into her personal kingdom. Most people just pay the fines and stay out of her way, but you're the first person to challenge her authority with real documentation. Dorothy warned me, she's going to escalate this situation. Mark my words. But sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even if it gets uncomfortable. Armed with official documents and growing support from reasonable neighbors, I felt confident enough to issue an ultimatum. I sent Brenda a certified letter demanding she remove the dock from my property within 48 hours and cease all harassment over non-existent HOA violations. I included copies of the county records clearly showing property boundaries and legal permits for every structure on my land. Looking back, I probably should have expected her response wouldn't be reasonable or proportionate. Miss Brenda decided to play dirty and she was about to learn some games have consequences she never anticipated. When your property rights are challenged, there's nothing like hiring a professional surveyor to settle the matter once and for all. I contacted Bartholomew Wilson, a licensed surveyor with 40 years of experience, highly recommended by the county clerk's office. On a crisp Tuesday morning, he arrived at my cabin carrying GPS units, metal detectors, measuring chains, and powerful lights. Bartholomew was a tall, lean man with weathered hands and a methodical precision that comes from decades of measuring things down to the inch. Son, he said while unloading his truck, I've dealt with situations like this my whole career. Let's get out there and see what the real boundaries look like. The survey took nearly 3 days. Bartholomew and his young assistant, Tommy, started by locating the original survey markers placed by my grandfather's surveyor back in 1965. Using a metal detector, they found the first iron rod buried beneath nearly 6 decades of leaves and soil about 30 feet into what current neighbors considered community forest. Tommy carefully excavated around the marker as Bartholomew cross-checked his collection of maps, deed descriptions, and survey notes. Your grandfather's surveyor was thorough, Bartholomew noted approvingly. These markers are exactly where they should be according to your deed. As they worked their way around the perimeter, the extent of the boundary discrepancies became clear. The GPS coordinates from each recovered marker fed into Bartholomew's tablet, gradually building a detailed map of my true property lines, overlaid with satellite imagery of current structures. What emerged was shocking. My property extended far beyond what I had imagined. It included significant portions of what the HOA had long claimed as community property. The community dock used by 4 families was entirely on my land, about 50 feet inside my actual property line. But the encroachments didn't stop there. Brenda's backyard entertainment area with its expensive hot tub, outdoor kitchen, and elaborate deco extended 15. Brenda's backyard entertainment area extended about 20 feet onto my property. The pathway connecting several houses to the waterfront ran almost entirely through my land. Even more shocking was the discovery that the HOA's so-called community area with its gazebo, playground equipment, and parking lot was located roughly 60% on land that legally belonged to me. Tommy let out a low whistle when Bartholomew showed him the overlay map. "Mr. Thompson, we're talking about major structures built on your land." The most significant discovery came on the 3rd day, when they surveyed the waterfront area using a combination of GPS technology and traditional methods. Bartholomew determined my property line didn't just end at the water's edge, it extended about 30 feet into the lake itself, following the original shoreline as it was when my grandfather first purchased the land. This meant that the community swimming area, boat slips, and even the small beach where neighborhood children played were all technically on my property. Lakefront property is tricky, Bartholomew explained. Original surveys often included water rights and submerged land, but over time, people tend to forget about that. When Bartholomew handed me the final survey report with detailed maps, GPS coordinates, and photos of every boundary marker, I sat in stunned silence. The legal implications were huge. Not only did the HOA have no authority over my land, but dozens of their most important community features had been built on property they had no right to use. The swimming area where children learned to swim, the dock where families kept their boats, the playground where neighborhood kids played, even the community center where home meetings were held sat on Thompson family land. The survey also revealed that several newer houses in the development had been built based on incorrect assumptions about property lines. While most homes were safely inside their lot boundaries, a few had driveways, sheds, or landscaping that technically encroached on my property. The whole neighborhood had been operating under boundary assumptions based on wishful thinking rather than legal documentation. As I reviewed Bartholomew's thorough documentation, I finally understood why my grandfather had been so meticulous about record-keeping. Every survey marker, boundary description, easement, and water right had been carefully documented and filed with the county. The HOA development had been constructed around our property, without anyone verifying the actual legal boundaries. Now, the chickens were coming home to roost. That evening, I sat on my dock watching the sunset, contemplating the magnitude of what I'd discovered. The community dock stretched into the water beneath my feet, the pavilion was visible through the trees, and the swimming area echoed with the sounds of children playing, all legally mine. I had no desire to be vindictive or cruel to families who had innocently enjoyed these amenities for years, but I couldn't allow Brenda's harassment to continue based on fictional authority. The next morning, I called Dorothy to share the survey results. Her reaction was immediate. "I knew it," she said. "I've been watching this neighborhood for 20 years, and something always seemed off about how that HOA claimed ownership of so much waterfront." She urged me to inform Brenda about the findings before word spread through the neighborhood gossip network. That afternoon, I called Brenda to let her know the professional survey had been completed and there were significant findings she needed to be aware of. Her response: "Kurt, whatever your little survey says, Mr. Thompson, this community has rights established for years. Don't think you can intimidate us with paperwork." Little did she know, her world was about to be turned completely upside down. The news of the survey results hit Brenda like a tsunami and her reaction was exactly what I expected. Within 6 hours of our call, she had convened an emergency HOA board meeting, contacted Cornelius Blackwood for legal advice, and launched what could only be described as a full-scale panic campaign across the neighborhood. According to Dorothy, who had a front row seat to the unfolding drama, Brenda spent the entire evening calling board members, key supporters, and anyone who would listen. Her voice grew shrill and desperate with every conversation. "She's telling people you're trying to steal community property," Dorothy reported with barely contained amusement. "Apparently, you're some kind of con artist who forged documents." By the next morning, Brenda had fully embraced conspiracy theorist mode. She spread wild rumors about my background and motives, telling anyone who'd listen that I was probably working with outside developers who wanted to destroy the character of Pine Ridge Estates. She claimed my environmental background was a cover story, and that I was actually involved in a land speculation scheme. According to neighbors she contacted, I was simultaneously a government agent seizing private property, a criminal who inherited dirty money, and an environmental terrorist planning to poison the lake. Brenda's harassment campaign was coordinated with military precision and completely unhinged. She organized property protection patrols of herself and the most paranoid residents she could recruit, all wearing bright orange t-shirts with community defense printed boldly across the front. These patrols drove slowly past my cabin at all hours, photographing my property, vehicles, and visitors. They set up folding chairs on what they claimed was the property line, taking turns monitoring my activities. Brenda herself often stalked around my cabin's perimeter with a tablet, documenting what she called evidence of property tampering. The psychological warfare quickly escalated from annoying to genuinely disruptive, and possibly illegal. Brenda filed formal complaints with every government agency she could think of, claiming my property posed environmental hazards, that I violated building codes, and that I was contaminating the lake water. She contacted the department. Brenda escalated her attacks by filing false reports with the Department of Natural Resources, claiming suspicious chemical runoff from my property. She repeatedly called the fire department, alleging unauthorized burning and unsafe structures. She even sent anonymous tips to the IRS, accusing me of tax evasion. When official complaints failed to yield results, Brenda turned to direct intimidation, revealing just how unhinged she had become. She began leaving threatening notes on my door, my truck, and even floating in waterproof containers near my dock. These notes are written in her distinctive handwriting, using various colored pens and decorated with angry emoticons, accused me of being a community destroyer and property thief. She blocked my driveway with orange traffic cones and posted handmade signs around the neighborhood warning residents about a dangerous individual to protect their property values. The signs featured unflattering photos of me, apparently taken with a telephoto lens. The rumor mill Brenda fed went into overdrive, pumping out increasingly bizarre stories about my supposed criminal activities and sinister intentions. She told neighbors I planned to build a compound on the waterfront that would ruin the lake's peaceful nature. She claimed I had ties to radical environmental groups aiming to sabotage private property rights. She even suggested I was mentally unstable and potentially violent, citing my aggressive stance on property lines as evidence of dangerous instability. Some neighbors reported that she had implied I might be involved in drug trafficking. Brenda's campaign reached its peak when she organized an emergency community protection meeting at the community center which, according to my new survey, was partially built on my property. The meeting took place on a Thursday evening and was attended by nearly every resident of Pine Ridge Estates. Brenda was so worked up she could barely speak coherently, alternating between tearful pleas for community solidarity and angry rants accusing me of trying to steal their way of life. She handed out packets of so-called evidence, including printed emails, copies of the survey report, and photos of my property with ominous captions. The most revealing moment came when Brenda completely broke down in front of the crowd. "I've put everything into this community," she sobbed, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her cheeks. "I've given you all beautiful spaces, protected your property values, maintained standards that keep this place special, and now some outsider wants to come in and destroy it all with fake papers and legal threats. We can't let him win." Several neighbors looked uncomfortable at her emotional outburst, especially when she started demanding contributions for a legal defense fund. After the meeting, Brenda's behavior grew even more erratic. She began recruiting teenagers from allied families to harass me, paying them small sums to throw eggs at my cabin and leave garbage on my property. She organized boycotts of local businesses I frequented, pressuring shop owners to refuse me service. She even contacted a few of my freelance clients, warning them about my supposed unstable mental state and legal trouble as an attempt to sabotage my livelihood. The final straw came late one night when Brenda and two of her most loyal supporters attempted to dismantle sections of my dock, claiming they were reclaiming community property. Fortunately, the security cameras I had installed captured the entire incident, including Brenda's distinctive voice directing the operation, and her bright floral muumuu she wore for the occasion. The next morning, armed with video evidence of trespassing and attempted property destruction, I was finally ready to take legal action that would end Brenda's reign of terror once and for all. Working with Daniel Park to build a comprehensive legal case against Brenda and the HOA was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle, each piece revealing another layer of deception and misconduct. The legal documents we filed included thorough cease and desist orders for harassment, formal trespassing charges for unauthorized use of my property, demands for the immediate removal of all structures built on my land without permission, and a lawsuit seeking damages from both the harassment campaign and illegal commercial activities at the fundraiser. But Daniel uncovered something even more damaging than simple property boundary disputes. The fundraiser Brenda had organized violated multiple city ordinances, including requirements for vendor permits, insurance for public events, and authorization for commercial activities. Most importantly, collecting money on private property without the owner's consent was classified as a felony under state law. The deeper we dug into the property history and HOA documents, the more shocking the revelations became. My grandfather had never signed any agreement transferring any portion of his land to community use, no matter what Brenda and her lawyer claimed. The HOA development had been built under the assumption that they could simply include the waterfront area as community property without any legal basis for that assumption. Even more damning, Brenda had personally signed off on the development plans when she worked as a real estate agent for the original developer, despite having no legal authority to approve anything related to my family's property. For 3 years, the HOA had been illegally collecting fees for community amenities that were actually located on private property they had no right to use. But the most shocking discovery came when Daniel started investigating Brenda's recent activities as HOA president. City records showed she had signed a contract with Lakeside Marine Construction for a $15,000 dock upgrade project, claiming full authority over the waterfront area where my dock was located. The contract called for a complete renovation of the existing community dock, including new floating dock systems, boat slips, and even a small pavilion for waterfront gatherings. Construction was scheduled to begin the following month, and Brenda had already submitted partial payment from HOA funds. She had literally contracted to renovate property she didn't own using money collected from neighbors who had no idea their fees were being spent on illegal improvements. When the legal papers arrived via certified mail, Brenda's reaction was even more entertaining than I anticipated. According to Chester Davidson, who witnessed the delivery, she opened the envelope on her front porch and immediately started screaming loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. Within hours, she was going door to door trying to organize an emergency dissolution of the HOA, apparently hoping that disbanding the organization would somehow make the legal problems disappear. Her desperation was palpable. That evening, she showed up at my door wearing a pink cardigan embroidered with poodles and a forced smile that fooled absolutely no one. "Lucas, surely we can work something out," she said in a voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I'm sure we can be reasonable adults about this whole misunderstanding." The real scandal broke wide open when Daniel discovered city records showed no proper paperwork had been filed for the fundraiser event. More damning still, the $3,000 collected was not in any official HOA account. Instead, the money had been deposited into Brenda's personal checking account, where it remained for over a week without any transfer to HOA funds or allocation to neighborhood improvements. "It appears Mrs. Rutherford decided to pocket the community donations," Daniel explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had seen this kind of corruption before. "Between the embezzlement, the unauthorized contracts, and the commercial activity on private property, she's looking at serious criminal charges in addition to the civil litigation." The dramatic confrontation that followed was exactly the kind of public spectacle Brenda had been trying to avoid. Chester Davidson, being a contractor himself, recognized the Lakeside Marine construction trucks when they arrived to begin work on the dock upgrade project. He immediately called me, and I rushed down to the waterfront with Daniel's property documentation and a camera to record everything. When I explained to the construction foreman that they were about to commit trespassing and destruction of private property, their reaction was swift and professional. That's when Brenda arrived in her white BMW convertible with the top down, wearing a neon yellow sundress that looked like it had been designed for a beach party rather than a neighborhood crisis. "You can't stop progress," she screamed at me while the construction workers packed up their equipment. The situation escalated even further when Dorothy's niece, Samantha Wells, a local news reporter, arrived with a camera crew to cover what she'd heard was an interesting property dispute. Brenda's public breakdown in front of the news cameras was spectacular and completely self-destructive. She ranted about how I was trying to destroy property values, ruin their way of life, and steal from hard-working families who just wanted to enjoy the lake. When Samantha asked about the embezzlement allegations and the unauthorized construction contracts, Brenda's response was to claim that I had manipulated the legal system and was probably in cahoots with crooked lawyers who hated community values. The community's reaction to these revelations was swift and decisive. Neighbors who had trusted Brenda with their HOA fees demanded full financial audits of all community accounts. Chester Davidson revealed that Brenda had approached him months earlier about falsifying construction permits. Dorothy produced copies of meeting minutes showing Brenda had consistently voted herself bonuses and expense reimbursements from HOA funds without board approval. Several families discovered their monthly HOA fees had been increased without proper notification. The HOA was officially dissolved within 2 weeks, and most neighbors seemed relieved to be free from Brenda's tyrannical leadership style. My final offer to the community was fair and reasonable. I proposed lease agreements that would allow honest neighbors to continue using the dock area for a nominal monthly fee. Daniel filed criminal complaints for embezzlement and fraud, ensuring Brenda would face personal legal consequences beyond just the civil litigation. Brenda made one final desperate attempt to salvage her situation, but it only sealed her fate more completely. The final court hearing at Millbrook County Courthouse was everything I'd hoped for and more. Judge Patricia Thornfield, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense, reviewed all the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who clearly didn't appreciate having her time wasted by frivolous disputes. After less than an hour of deliberation, she ruled completely in my favor on every count. The court ordered the immediate removal of all unauthorized structures from my property within 30 days, awarded me $15,000 in damages for harassment and illegal use of my land, held Brenda personally liable for all construction contracts and legal mistakes made by the HOA, and required her to pay additional attorney fees, bringing her total financial obligation to over $40,000. The judge's final comments were particularly satisfying. This case represents a clear pattern of harassment, financial misconduct, and abuse of community authority. The financial consequences for Brenda were devastating and entirely of her own making. Beyond the damages awarded to me, she faced additional legal fees that continued mounting as criminal charges for embezzlement moved through the system. The HOA's dissolution left her personally responsible for all outstanding contracts and obligations, including the $15,000 dock construction project that never should have been authorized in the first place. To cover these mounting costs, she was forced to put her McMansion on the market for significantly less than she'd done, and even then, it took months to find a buyer. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that her obsession with protecting property values had ultimately led to the destruction of her own financial stability. Brenda's final public meltdown occurred during what she probably thought would be a graceful exit from Pine Ridge Estates. She showed up at my property with a moving truck and demolition crew, demanding one last chance to talk like civilized people about the court-ordered dock removal. Her appearance was a stark contrast to the meticulously maintained image she tried to project as HOA president. She wore a torn gray sweatshirt, flip-flops, and no makeup, with her bleached hair uncombed and mascara staining her cheeks from obvious crying. "This is all your fault," she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "I made this neighborhood beautiful. I gave these people pride. You've destroyed everything I worked for." I simply stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone observing a nature documentary. I knew the practical resolution of the community issues turned out to be much simpler than anyone had anticipated. Working with Daniel Park, I developed reasonable lease agreements for families who wanted to continue using the dock area, charging a modest fee of $200 per month per family, actually less than what they had been paying in HOA dues. The elimination of Brenda's administrative overhead and questionable financial practices meant that everyone came out ahead financially, while gaining access to a properly maintained waterfront facility. Chester Davidson volunteered to handle much of the legal paperwork and coordinate maintenance schedules, grateful to be free from Brenda's arbitrary rule enforcement. My personal victory extended far beyond the legal and financial outcomes. Using some of the damages money, I renovated the cabin exactly as my grandfather would have wanted, with a new deck overlooking the lake, updated electrical systems that maintained its rustic character, and a fully restored dock that would serve the community well for decades to come. I set up a small home office in what had been my grandfather's workshop, complete with environmental monitoring equipment for freelance consulting work. The view of Lake Pine View from my desk every morning reminded me why this place was worth fighting for. 6 months after the court victory, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm that my grandfather would have approved of. My girlfriend Rebecca moved into the cabin with me, bringing her own love of nature and peaceful living to our shared space. The new residents who bought Brenda's former house were a young couple named Griffin and Melodia, people who actually read property agreements before signing them and contributed positively to community life without trying to control everyone around them. Dorothy Weatherby became not just a neighbor but a genuine friend who often joined me for evening fishing trips where we'd share stories about the old days. The final twist came from a letter my grandfather had left in a sealed envelope, which I discovered during my initial research but hadn't opened until after everything was resolved. His handwritten note, dated just months before his death, showed remarkable foresight. "Lou," he'd written, "I've seen some suspicious surveying activity around the property lately, and I suspect someone might try to claim parts of our land after I'm gone. If anyone ever challenges your ownership, stand your ground. The deed and survey records are all filed properly with the county. Remember, if someone tries to take what belongs to you, fight back, but always fight fair, always fight smart. And remember that the truth has a way of coming out when you need it most. So the next time someone tries to intimidate you with fancy letterhead and legal threads, remember that sometimes the little guy has bigger guns than anyone realizes. Property rights matter. The truth generally prevails when properly documented, and bullies like Brenda usually defeat themselves if you give them enough rope." As for Miss Brenda Rutherford herself, last I heard, she'd moved to Boca Raton, Florida, where she was reportedly trying to become president of another homeowners association. I genuinely wish her new neighbors luck in dealing with whatever schemes she's undoubtedly cooking up in her new tropical setting. If you enjoyed this story about standing up to neighborhood bullies and the sweet satisfaction of justice being served, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. Have you ever had to deal with an overzealous hoe or similar situation? Share your own David versus Goliath moments. I'm willing to bet there are plenty of other stories out there about people who stood up to authority figures who had no real authority at all. These are true QA stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.